we've got a good amount to do today. I don't think we're gonna get through everything on the menu and list that I sent you. I sent out the shopping list, and I sent out a couple of the applicable recipes. What I had planned, or what the menu basically for this meal prep is, farm to table. We've got roasted chicken, some farro risotto, roasted veggies like carrots and onions. I'm going to show you, demo some searing Brussels sprouts, because that's kind of a nice skill to learn. And then you can have any kind of chopped greens or lettuces. If you get bagged lettuces, that's fine. I've got some market lettuces. All that is just chopped salad greens to have throughout the week. If you do that now, get it all chopped up and washed, then you're ready for any kind of salads or sandwiches or mixes that you might want to make with it. If you keep it in a really good airtight bag or container with some paper towel, then it's going to last you for the next 4 or 5 days. So if you don't eat it first. And if you get bagged pre-washed greens, you're already ahead of the game on that. You just have that ready to go for your different kind of options that you might want to eat through the week. If you haven't been here last week, what we focus on in this class is more of partial meal prep. So you get a bunch of different things ready, and then your meals throughout the week are a lot easier and a lot more fun to mix and match and prepare. Last week we did a bunch of different Asian things, and I posted some of the things that I used mine for on our story through the week. So I'll do that again, just to demonstrate how I'm using the meal prep through the week in various ways. There's general ideas. You can use it like roasted chicken, risotto, veggies on one plate one day, maybe have a salad to start. You can make a big salad with the chicken and the roasted veggies chopped up into the greens. You can put it all into a wrap. You could put the veggies into a breakfast scramble. You could do chopped chicken. You can leave it whole. If you, depending on what's cheapest and what works in your life, buy whole chicken or buy quarter pieces, which is the leg and the thigh combination still combined. It's probably a lot cheaper. You can get it in bulk, and you can marinate it and cook it that way, or you can break it down into pieces, which sometimes I buy whole chicken, but then I still break it down before I cook it because it cooks a lot faster in pieces. If you're going to just marinate a whole roasted chicken, it would be delicious with this marinade. You would just have to roast it as a whole roasted chicken, which would take about an hour in a 375 oven. And that you can do. I just like to do pieces because it's a lot faster. My oven is on a lot less time. And so even if I buy the quarter pieces, I just split that. There's a little fat line between the leg and the thigh on the inside. Just cut right down that fat line, and you'll split it through the joint of the bones. I don't have a combo to demonstrate that today, but I'll try to get that for another week that we might work on. But however you buy your chicken, it's okay. If you buy tofu or cauliflower or pork, that's also okay. It's really up to you and your family what kind of works for you and your lifestyle, your diet. And this marinade would be delicious on all of those things. So focusing on what you need to get first, that's how we make meal prep most efficient. We have some things to roast in the oven, the veggies and the chicken. So we want to get that stuff in so that we can then do our other little stuff. The risotto is made from cooked farro. So if you are following along with me and you don't have the farro already cooked, then you can watch how I demo the risotto and you can finish that up on your own. But I've got mine already cooked off and all of my stuff prepped for that. I'm making a very small amount of farrotto, which is a cute way of calling farro risotto. But that is entirely up to you. It lasts good 3 or 4 days, so you can make a big batch of it. You can also make a really big batch of it and freeze it. It's not the worst thing in the world, and then you can pull out portions of it and reheat it with maybe a little bit more veggie stock, and you've got sort of a fresh batch ready to go. Grains freeze pretty well, as long as you let them cool very, very well before you put them away. So
it's a great whole grain.
Yeah, it's
high in soluble fiber, and yeah,
so much going for it. That's awesome. Just to get a couple things, I make a little prep list every time. Sort of really helpful when you're doing your own prep, just to kind of get in order, so you're not like stopping in between and going, wait, what was I supposed to do next? What did I think I was? And then you get out of order, and then you're disappointed in yourself. So to avoid any of those things, I may make a little list. It's super helpful. What we want to do first is marinate the chicken. Because we want to let that sit. If you look at the recipe for that, which is one of the recipes that I did send out, you want to let it sit for at least like 15 minutes, just 10, 15 minutes, so that it can absorb all of the love that we're about to put onto it. I've got the marinade made. It's chopped fresh thyme, parsley, rosemary, and sage. And then I've got pressed garlic, or I used a microplane to grate it. You can use a garlic press. You can use jarred chopped garlic, you know, the squeezy kind of garlic. You can use rough chopped garlic if you like it like that. That's totally fine. I've just got it nice and minced and grated in here so that I can really disperse the flavor and not have like super sharp chunks of garlic. Just about 2 to 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and what else did that recipe call for? Salt and pepper. I went a little heavy on the thyme because I really like thyme. So if there's something that you like or you don't like, you can adjust accordingly. It's kind of like a very wet pesto. I don't know if you can tell that consistency by the way I'm kind of stirring it around. It's not as oily as it is herby, which is good. I want to kind of really soak this in flavor, but not a whole lot of extra fat. It doesn't need that because I'm using skin-on chicken pieces here, and it's dark meat. So it's already not the leaner of the variety. If you prefer or need to have a very, very lean, then use boneless, skinless chicken. That would be amazing. The chicken breast would taste fantastic. This would make it really, really flavorful and great. So I am just going to scrape this all out into this bowl. I've got my handy gloves on because I'm going to use my hands. It's the best tool, I like to say. I can make sure that everything gets really well coated when I'm using my hands.
And all those herbs are just really high in antioxidants and add a lot of, even some nutrients like vitamin K. And antimicrobial. So I know we think of them as just adding some flavor, but they're actually rich in plant phenols and other things that help our health too.
That's so awesome. And they don't really add anything bad unless you have some sort of allergy or something. And so the more you use, the less of other things like fat and salt that you kind of have to put in when you want things to be really, really flavorful. So just making sure that everything is coated top and bottom. If you have like a weird thing about touching chicken, I know some people who have that thing, just use tongs and make sure that you're tossing it around really, really well. I'm going to set this aside just for about 10 to 15 minutes, like I said, while we get a couple other things going, and then that's going to go into the oven. But I don't want to put it in the oven right away. Then sort of, it's all just going to slough off. It needs to kind of get in there just a little bit. So I am going to get some veggies going in the oven as well. On this menu, I was calling for roasted carrots with onions. You can use any veggies. I think I put in the substitutions like possibility. You can kind of substitute anything. You can use any kind of carrots. You can use any kinds of, if you don't like Brussels sprouts, you can use zucchini or asparagus. Just make sure you're using a lot of different variety and lots of different color. I like to use the more hearty vegetables that have more fiber in them, like carrots or sweet potatoes or butternut squash, the harder veggies, for roasting. It just breaks them down nice. It makes a nice flavor. It brings out the sugars, and then they are not so hard. But then the softer veggies, like we're going to use corn, cherry tomatoes, and snap peas, we're going to leave those raw. We can use them for anything throughout the week, like salads, mixing into wraps or bowls. You can then throw them into, while you're reheating the roasted vegetables, throw them onto the pan and they'll get nice and kind of half roasted and delicious. And you can do a lot of different things once your veggies are already prepped and ready to go. These are onions, and I happen to find like rainbow kind of purple carrots. I had a little extra chopped parsley from my chicken marinade, so I put it in that. I'm not going to throw it away. It's not going to ruin it. It's only going to make it more delicious. And as Amy just pointed out, I'm adding a lot of good things to it as well. The onions, I cut into pretty large chunk wedges. I like caramelized roasted onions, and that way they're gonna keep their substance, but have a nice kind of sugary bite to them in the end. If you don't like onions, don't use the onions. If you like them but want them a little bit less intrusive, cut them as small as you like. It really is okay. You just kind of need to vary them the other things that you're roasting with them. I didn't cut these carrots at all because they're very, very baby carrots. And by the time the onions are roasted at this large chunk, they're all gonna kind of cook at the same time. If I cut my onions into really skinny slivers for like a little caramelized onion, then you would want to cut your carrots down into maybe 1 to 2 inch pieces, or just smaller, so that the cooking time won't be affected. All I'm going to do for that is salt, pepper, and a little bit of my olive oil blend, which is extra virgin olive oil and canola oil I put back into this bottle. Kosher salt is the salt that I use, but sea salt, you can use table salt. Totally fine. It's good, I guess, to get iodine in your system, right, Amy? I don't.
Yep, that's why it's fortified.
Yeah, that's why they do that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and those carrots are just wonderful source of beta carotene, which is turns to vitamin A in the body and is useful for immunity, eye health, our mucous membranes, our skin. Actually, all those yellow or all those orange vegetables you mentioned, the sweet potato, squash, right? All of those are great sources of beta carotene.
Awesome. That was just a very small pinch of kosher salt, and use as much black pepper as you like. That is a very personal thing. I am going to use tongs for this, just because I can use them again for the Brussels sprouts and I don't have to keep wasting gloves. But practical as I can with my dish use so that I don't have too many to do in the end. Just not swimming. We never want our roasted vegetables to be swimming or like stopping in oil, but as long as everything looks nice and shiny and glistening and like it's all been well dispersed and coated. And I'm gonna put this out on a sheet pan that I've already got lined with foil. Again, for easy cleanup, and it just helps conduct the heat a little bit. Now I do want to get most of that parsley out of the bowl, mostly because I spent the time chopping it and someone spent the time growing it, and it's delicious, and so I don't want to throw it all away. So I'm gonna just get as much out as I can. Saves also on the dishes. Always thinking about that. So just kind of spread this out. If some of your onions break apart, that's fine. If some of them are still in big chunks, that is also fine. It does not matter. I've got my oven preheated to 400 because that's the same temperature called for the chicken. I might roast my veggies at around 425 if they were in there by themselves, but I want to get everything in the oven at the same time and just be practical about it. So the veggies are roasting at 400 today. And they're going to come out great. They just might take about 5 or 6 minutes longer. So nice, well spread out. I can see that the parsley is well dispersed. I'm going to get that into the oven on the middle rack. When I put the chicken in, you're going to wonder how are they both going to be on the middle rack. My oven is not big enough to have them sit side by side unless one is on a slight tilt, which is doable. But the veggies are going to be wonderful and get a lot of good caramelization on the lower rack. I just want to give them a little bit of a head start in the middle where they get kind of cooked through the middle, and then when we move them to the bottom, they're going to get a really nice roast from the surface contact to the pan, just because it is hotter on the bottom of the oven than it is right in the middle.
So Julia, I have a quick question about roasting. Is it important to not overcrowd your pan so that they actually roast? I've heard like, yes. Otherwise they kind of more are steamed in there.
Yes, definitely. If you have, especially if it's like a lot of layers of it on top of each other, then the one underneath are just going to steam. You're not going to get a really good roasty caramelization happening. For anything that you're roasting, vegetables or protein, you do kind of want to make sure that everything has its own little space. Some of them more than others. Mushrooms need a lot of room. Sometimes if I'm doing a sheet pan dinner, I don't worry as much about that. You've got your oven on to like 450 and you just put everything on one tray. But if it were too many layers of it, then the stuff underneath would be mush, just total mush. Yeah. So yeah, it is definitely important to think about that if you need to do 2 trays, you know, or 2 batches, depending on your family size or how much you're doing of certain things. But I try to keep, like, 1/2 sheet tray is usually a good amount of anything for like a 4 to 6 person family. You do that much, one good thick layer of vegetables, that's a lot of good veggie prep for the week. But depends on how much you're using it all for and stuff. So sometimes 2 trays worth might be necessary. I am going to space my chicken out on this tray in that kind of along that line. I do want to make sure that they have enough room and they're not necessarily touching if I can avoid it, because then each one doesn't get the air circulation and all the heat moving around them quite as nicely. So the pack of drumsticks that I bought happen to have 5, even though it said 4. So I guess I won today.
So there is a question about if you're cooking the whole chicken, would you just kind of do the same rub kind of?
Yeah, and I would do it inside and out. Get as much of that flavor in the cavity as possible, as well as on the outside. Sometimes even you can go as crazy as getting some underneath the skin across the breast.
Mm-hmm.
On the top, that would be really, really nice to get the flavor onto the meat. But yeah, same process. Maybe let it sit in the marinade or let it really get it rubbed and coated for at least like 20 minutes, just because the bones, it's going to cook longer anyway. I would also, if I were doing this and with the whole chicken, about halfway through the cooking process, baste it, not with any more marinade, but just with like a little bit of that clean canola oil or extra virgin olive oil, so that it doesn't get super dried out, because it has to cook longer. But it's going to, yeah, very simple and straightforward. Just rub it, let it marinate, let it sit. I'm going to put this chicken in now, just so that we have time to get it done. Like I said, moving those veggies down to the bottom, putting the chicken in the middle, making sure I'm at that temperature. Yep. All right. Now those things are just going to work until they're done. So they do all of that for us while we can move on and do other things. So what did I have on the list next? I want to make sure the Brussels sprouts. Okay. So I'm using a cast iron pan for the Brussels sprouts. It gives a really, really good hard sear and caramelization. I think I talked about that in other classes and maybe here before. I love cast iron pans. They conduct the heat very well. They keep hot very well. They maintain the temperature that you kind of want them to be at if you adjust the heat appropriately. They taste good, and Amy,
they add some iron to the diet, which is great. Especially if you are using anything with citrus, like a lemon juice or tomato-based sauce. Anything acidic will help some more of that iron come out of the pan and actually leach into your food.
Yeah.
So, and it's a nutrient, especially for women, that's often hard to get. So
I forgot something, and this is, people do this all the time. The recipe says, and I'm pretty sure I wrote this, yeah, you can do this chicken in any kind of like a casserole dish, a baking dish, or on a sheet pan. I'm going to add a little bit more flavor to this roasting process, though, not just the marinade that we did. I'm going to squeeze some lemon over the top, and I'm going to put some whole herbs and some extra onion and some garlic that I have, just sort of scattered around, as it does go a long way to helping the cooking process get even more flavorful. So I literally just have like the spare sprigs of herbs that I washed and picked from earlier. Some sage, parsley, thyme. I don't know if anybody caught on, but it was the same herbs as the song. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. So they are a wonderful, perfect combination. It wasn't just Simon and Garfunkel. So there you go, scattered about. It's just going to add a lot of extra flavor. And I've got some whole roasted garlic. I'm not even going to take them out of the peel. You can definitely do that, but I kind of want to leave it in the peel so that I then have some roasted garlic in the end to squeeze out. Just adding the flavor, adding some more love to the process. I had extra onion from when I was dicing onion from the risotto. I'm going to just sort of break that up. All right.
I didn't know a tray of uncooked chicken could look so beautiful.
Well, and that adds, when you think about that, that is what is going to make it taste so much better. That little extra step that I'm glad I remembered. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of lemon across all of it. I didn't want this to be in the marinade because, well, it can kind of start breaking down the muscle tissue, which is good for certain things that you're cooking. And it wouldn't, I guess, necessarily hurt this, but I wanted to add it on at the end so that it would be a nice, bright flavor we would taste separately from the rest of the thing. If that makes sense? All right. Back in, doing its thing, just like we said. Okay, back to the Brussels sprouts. I've got my cast iron. I'm going to turn it down. It's pretty warm. I've got it at a medium heat. Depending on how hot it is, you want it to be a hot pan, but then you don't want it to maintain a ridiculously high heat. You're going to burn your nice little baby cabbages. These Brussels sprouts are hardy, but you don't want to ruin them. So I'm going to use that same olive oil, but olive oil, canola oil blend. About a teaspoon and a half of that. Only enough to coat. We might need to add a little bit extra. The Brussels sprouts tend to soak it up, but I'm not doing a ton. So I don't necessarily want them to be swimming or fried in oil. I'm going to move this, use the sudden movement, just so you can see. This is the key here. This is a little bit tedious, but this is the one time that I'm going to get a bit finicky with you guys on like presentation or method, or you want this, you want the flat side to get the sear. That cut that you made, hopefully cutting it in the middle is always better. If you want to roast them whole, you can do that and just put them on a tray and put them in the oven. But this nice seared and roasted Brussels sprout, we cut them at least in the middle, sometimes in a quarter if they're very, very large. Mine were small enough to just be cut in half. So you want them to be mostly face down. You can pour them in and then gently kind of flip them over. Be careful. The oil might splatter. Do this with gloves on or do it with tongs if you need to. I have crazy insensitive fingertips because of my years in the kitchen, so please don't try this necessarily. Tongs work great. And I'm going to use tongs to finish the process. So, I want to make sure that didn't touch any chicken, actually. Once you've got them in there, this is, again, I know I've talked about this before and other things. You don't want to move them. It's like, it's counterintuitive. You think like, oh God, I want to stir them up or I want to like shake them up. I'm going to put, I don't know, about 8 grains of kosher salt. Very, very tiny, tiny pinch of kosher salt. Plenty of black pepper. And I'm going to let them get a really good hard sear. That caramelization that happens, that little trick of just like waiting, being patient and waiting and not flipping them until they're ready and making sure that they get a really, really good hard caramelization on the flat side, or if they fall on the round side, that's okay. But trying to make sure that you're getting a really good hard brown, like all the way coat. So it means leaving them there for a pretty good amount of time. I'm on medium heat.
This has been the hardest thing for me to do. And well, first to learn, but also to break the habit of wanting to flip things over, stir things around. But I have noticed you get so much better caramelization and the food looks better and actually tastes a lot better if you can just be patient.
Yep. You want to see if they flat around, that's all right. I can tell that some in the middle are getting a little bit brown. Probably not as much as I want, though. I don't know. You can see that very well. It's getting a little bit brown, but I want it to be all the way brown.
And can you sear frozen? Someone was asking about frozen, and since I don't know if they sear very well with the water content. Is it
It depends
possible?
on the veggie, but yeah, definitely. The thing about it is they won't get quite as nice of a caramelization because they are already blanched. So they've already been partially cooked. Most frozen veggies were blanched in hot water for, 30 seconds max. But that brief cooking process is how they're able to freeze them. Otherwise, if you freeze raw vegetables, it just doesn't work out. The crystals form all funny. And so most vegetables that you buy frozen in a bag have been blanched. So they've been like pre-boiled very quickly. And so they're already softer, which means you need to cook them very quickly because they're already mostly cooked. And so you can get a sear on them. You just need to make sure your pan is very hot and that your veggies are not completely thawed out yet. That's a mistake a lot of people make with frozen vegetables. Don't thaw them all the way 100% before you start to use them, because then they're just going to become waterlogged, like mushy problem children. You want them to be a little bit frozen still, maybe only 75% thawed, so they're still firm. And then when you put them in the hot pan, they'll finish thawing as they sear. And that's sort of the one way that you can get like a saute effect on frozen vegetables. Otherwise, they're best for just roasting. You can roast them up. They won't get super caramelized again, but they have a nice texture after cooking. Or steaming them, obviously, is a good way to kind of just bring them back. A lot of people just put them in the microwave, and that's perfectly fine too, as long as you're eating your vegetables. So you can see now I've got a very dark brown caramelized on most of them. That's what you're going for. There's a fine line between that first stage of it starting to caramelize to where it gets blackened. And you don't want blackened. You want this like good, very, very dark brown. Okay, now that I've got that color coming out on most of them, I'm just going to kind of give them a good fun toss. And then that's going to go into the oven too. That's another reason that I really love using cast iron, because they do need to finish roasting. They're very tough Brussels sprouts. They're small and mighty. And so to finish cooking them all the way through, make sure they're fork tender, just toss them into the oven to let them finish. So I'm going to turn my roasted veggies to the side. Put my Brussels sprouts down there next to them on the bottom rack, and that is three things kind of doing their thing for us.
So Julia, did you caramelize those on the stove first before putting them in the oven, just to give them a nice color and caramelization instead of just roasting them?
Yeah, I find that, you can take the time to make sure that each Brussels sprout is very well coated in oil, and then place them face side down on your sheet pan, lined with foil, and roast them at a really high temperature. And you'll get a really nice roasted Brussels sprout, but you still won't get quite that nice of a sear. And that just gives it a better flavor, I find. You don't have to do that though. I just really like the flavor it brings out, and it actually then speeds up the process. They will only take maybe 10 more minutes to finish in the oven, whereas if you just threw them in raw, they take a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple of different reasons. Plus, you can also, it's an old catering thing. If you sear them first and you get them, 60% of the way cooked, then you let them cool, you pack them out, you take them to someone's wedding, and then you finish them in the oven on site. And it's just sort of which you can definitely do in your meal prep. You can finish them on Tuesday with, the rest of your dinner. If you've got them pre-seared, then they're mostly done.
That's great.
A couple different reasons why it's a helpful process there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, the next on the prep list is I'm gonna demonstrate this risotto, which I'm using farro, so we can call it farroto, which is what they called it at one of my old companies. Very cute, right? For menus. You can do a lot of different things with farroto. We made theirs with lots of mushrooms and different stuff and Parmesan and flavors. You can do a lot of different veggies mixed in. It would be really delicious with like baby spinach or some other kind of tender green mixed in would be fantastic. Lots of different mushrooms, throw that in if you wanted. You could make this meat base and put some chicken in at the end, and just that's one of the ways also you can do the meal prep. Have just a bowl of risotto with some of the chopped chicken mixed up, really, really delicious. Make sure you have a salad on the side. So I'm using a non-stick pan for that. My cast iron is in the oven. I do have a larger one, but I want to be able to really stir this around and make sure nothing sticks too much. It's a rice dish that is based on the absorption of flavor as you cook it gently. In a lot of restaurants and a lot of traditional kitchens, you make huge batches of risotto every single day or week, and there's one lowly prep cook whose job it is to add one ladleful at a time of, you know, a delicious chicken or mushroom or Parmesan stock, and then stir it, waiting for the stock to absorb each time, one ladle at a time, and like gallons of risotto. It's very tedious. We're making a much smaller version, and I find that farro absorbs liquid much faster and quicker. So we're doing it right on the stove top. This is how a restaurant would like pick up a dish. They would have all of the things mise en place out, ready to go, and then you put it all together in a pan and serve it to the customer. So I've got my cooked farro, which I want to show you. It looks like puffed rice or like puffed barley. It's just a really nice, lovely whole grain. It's chewy and nutty in flavor and fantastic. So I recommend if you can find farro, try it out. Delicious. If you can't, this would work really, really well with rice. Brown rice would work great. You could have like a basmati risotto. That would be really interesting and wonderful. The method is what's important, and all that is slowly incorporating liquid over a short amount of time. So I'm going to use the tiniest amount of this oil because my nonstick pan is very, very nonstick, but because I want a little bit of that flavor and it's just going to help things absorb together, I need to first saute out some of my chopped onions, very, very small dice. You could leave them big and chunky if you like that, but I don't want the onions to be bigger or chunkier than the farro. I want this to kind of cook down into the risotto. So I'm sauteing. I'm making a third of the recipe that I sent out to you. So you can adjust it accordingly. Cooking is definitely more of an art. You can use less onion, you can use more onion. The more onion, the better, right, Amy? It's good for us.
Definitely. It adds just such great flavor, very few calories, no fat, no sodium.
All the good stuff. And it's one of those, well, it's one part of the Holy Trinity in cooking. Onion, celery, carrots. You add a little bit of that, especially if you caramelize them first in any way, whether it's roasting or sauteing. It's going to make whatever it is you're making taste better, unless you're making chocolate cake. Don't put those things into your desserts. I don't know. There's like beets in chocolate cake now, which is fine because it's, you know, it's a good way to sneak in some stuff.
Sweetness, some healthy
good natural
sweetness.
sugars, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So barley, you could use barley in place of farro. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it would be really delicious. You could absolutely make a barley risotto. It would be really good. It would absorb it a little bit differently. All the grains absorb a little bit differently from each other. So it's just about adding small amounts of liquid as you cook. But yes, it would be really wonderful. I want to show you that like the onions are starting to get nice and brown and broken down on the side that's touching the foil. My carrots are not completely tender, but my nail can start breaking the outside of the flesh of it. So they are coming along nicely. Brussels sprouts are getting really nicely crispy and delicious here. Those might be done. Brussels sprouts, you can tell if they're done literally just by sticking a sharp knife or a toothpick or something in it. If it goes all the way through, then it's going to be pork tender. That goes all the way through. So my Brussels sprouts are done. See how quick that was to finish in the oven. So I can let those set aside and cool down because I'm just going to be packing this stuff out as part of my meal prep. Sauteing these onions, I'm not trying to get dark caramelized onions here. Although that would be a really nice risotto if you made like a caramelized onion risotto or like a brown butter risotto. You could let things cook a little bit longer, but just gonna go for what we call sweating the onions right now, which is why they're on sort of a medium heat rather than a high heat. And I'm just trying to get them tender and mostly translucent and, you know, most of the way broken down because they're gonna keep cooking in this process. Next, I wanna check this recipe, make sure I am doing it the way that I have instructed. Yeah. So we're gonna add the white wine. This is called deglazing. I had been using a saute pan that wasn't such a nice nonstick pan. There would be little bits of onion and stuff on the bottom of the pan if you saute them at a good medium to medium-high heat. That's called the fond. There still is a flavor fond built up in this pan. When you build up a fond in the bottom of your saute pan, whether it's by sauteing onions or vegetables or meat, you want to leave that there, and then you want to get that flavor into your food by deglazing the pan. You deglaze a hot pan by pouring in a small amount of liquid. We're going to use a little bit of white wine today. You don't have to put alcohol in your food if it's an issue for you or your family. Then just use the same vegetable stock that we're going to be using for the rest of the recipe. Traditionally, risotto always has a little bit of white wine in it. That was about a tablespoon. I'm going to do maybe a tablespoon and a half. And I'm going to let that cook out, but I'm going to stir it up while it's evaporating so that it actually lubricates and loosens up all the bits on the bottom of the pan. All that flavor that accumulated, it kind of gets it unstuck and lets it soak into the onion. So the onions have now absorbed the cooked off wine. Alcohol cooks off in this process mostly. There's such a small amount in that little bit of wine that I poured in, but if it's also an issue, you can ignite it like a flambe and make sure that the alcohol burns off, but there's nothing left in here to burn off. It evaporated away anyway. So once that has evaporated, I'm adding in the farro, right? Yeah. My cooked farro, I'm just going to stir this around, make sure it incorporates with the onions. If you wanted yours to be a garlic risotto, or if you're putting mushrooms or anything in, you would do that at the same time as the onions. Make sure that everything is sauteed really nicely. If you wanted to add herbs, you would do that at this point too. All of the things that you would want to add to it, except the finishing. You can also finish with things like cheese and butter and herbs, which is how we're going to do this. But if you're doing the mushrooms or garlic, you would want to put that in with the onions to saute them out. Okay, I've pearled the cooked farro, which means it kind of has been tossed up and sweated in with some of the oil and the wine-soaked onions. Pearling raw grains means you cook them raw in your saute pan, or with a little bit of oil. You're toasting a raw grain before you start cooking it. Pearling it means also, it's a traditional peel-off method. It helps to keep them from sticking together and forming a big rice ball. Pearling is a really nice technique. So I'm even pearling my already cooked farro by making sure that it is sort of sauteed with the oil and toasted up before I start adding in my liquid, which I'm just using a low sodium vegetable broth. You can use chicken. You could definitely use beef, I guess. You could use a mushroom stock you could make yourself. Parmesan stock you could make by cooking like a vegetable stock with a whole bunch of Parmesan in it. There's a lot of different things you can do for stock.
Probably make your own too, with all the kind of scraps of vegetables that I usually, discard a lot of the stems or pieces that maybe, outer parts of the onion or whatever. You can just save those for a couple days and then make your own vegetable broth.
Yeah, that's a really good and easy thing to do. It's just, veggie scraps and water. Maybe bay leaf, a couple of sprigs of like parsley stem. It's really like what looks like trash, but it goes such a long way to creating. And then you're really guaranteeing yourself you're getting like the amount of flavor you like and very, very, very low sodium. If you buy yours, try to get one that already says, low sodium or salt, no salt added, things like that go a long way. So I'm measuring this into a 1/3 measuring cup, but I'm not even filling it. I'm just gonna pour some in until I can see that it needs to absorb it. Like there's enough liquid in there now that I want to wait for it to absorb it. Stir it around. Once it's all evaporated, then I pour in more liquid. This is sort of the tedious process of making a risotto. Can't really walk away from it. That's why they put the lowliest prep cook on it. It just has to stand there all day. All right, now that is cooked. That's cooked up. There's no more pools of liquid. It's all absorbed in or evaporated off. I'm going to add the next half of that first cup I measured. At this point, I'm going to keep it on medium heat. I want this to go kind of fast. I'm not worried about some French chef coming and yelling at me. Farro is also more forgiving than rice, so you can always add a little bit too much or a little bit not enough. Like, it's just whenever you think it's done and it tastes good, then it's done. You can stop adding liquid at that point. What I'm going for is so that this farro looks like it's almost doubled in size from what it started with from cooked farro, which cooked farro is actually already doubled in size from raw farro. So now I'm going for a quadruple raw farro, in size. It's going to get to look like a puffed grain, like it's split and puffed and absorbed more than it can handle. And that's the point that I'm going to stop.
There was a question about nutrition and the differences between barley and farro, and actually they're quite similar and you can use them interchangeably. Farro has a little bit more protein, but they're both, high in fiber, whole grains. It may be surprising to know that neither one of them are gluten-free. So if you're on a gluten-free diet for medical reasons, or just you feel better with less gluten, these do contain gluten. Farro is actually a variety of wheat, and barley is a grain that also is not tolerated by people on gluten-free because it does have some gluten in it. But I think, using a variety of different grains, oftentimes we don't even think to use either of these. They do have a slightly different flavor. And so just experimenting with different grains, I think is great.
Yeah, if it's not the perfect one for you, then try the next one. They're all interesting in kind of a slightly different way, and they can be used for mostly the same thing. Some are a little bit better than others for certain things. But yeah, I think that farro is made out of spelt wheat and emmer wheat, both of which are ancient grains, but both of which have gluten. All right, that I think is going to be the last batch. That was in total about 2/3 of liquid for me, just because I'm doing less than everyone else of the farro. So I'm going to let that last batch of liquid really absorb and cook off, and then we're going to be adding, I've already got it measured out here, a little bit of butter, just a little bit of butter, some Parmesan cheese, and a bunch of pick thyme. You can add in other flavors from the herb variety. I'm just going to keep this super classic and kind of the traditional Parmesan French flavor, which is a lot of thyme. So I'm going to stir this up, help make sure that that gets really absorbed. This is the end of the farro process. And then I'm going to let this set aside and cool down. While it cools down, it will keep absorbing any liquid that might even be left over. So if by the time you go to put your risotto away, it is like too thick, you can always either then or on the reheat process just add a little bit more of that stock or a little bit of water, and it will stir back up and thin back out. It's very forgiving. All right, that is as much. It's going to keep absorbing. I'm going to add in the butter, the cheese, and the thyme. I'm just using grated Parm, like the sort of generic American style grated Parmesan. You can definitely like grate your own Parmesan or get shredded or shaved. I'm not sure if there's much of a health difference, actually. Do they add anything to those like jars of grated Parmesan cheese? Anything?
I think sometimes they add like an anti-caking type of preservative.
Yeah.
We do have a question about quinoa, and quinoa could be a great choice from a nutrition standpoint. It is a complete protein. Not a whole lot of grains are. So that would be a great choice nutritionally. But would the consistency work in this?
No, it wouldn't absorb. It wouldn't absorb the same way at all. But making a quinoa salad instead would be fantastic. But I've never tried a quinoa risotto. I just don't think that they have the same absorption qualities and that they don't puff up. It doesn't really quite work the same.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the butter has melted. I can smell the cheese is cooked in. The herbs are well dispersed. It is now completely absorbed, all liquid and thick. That's it. Oh, I wish you could smell that. I'm gonna finish it with so much black pepper and just heaven. Okay. Fantastic. A little tiny bit of that with the rest of your meal prep, really healthy veggies and protein, and maybe a 1 ounce portion of that butter risotto, and it goes a long way for flavor and for happiness. All right, my veggies, I'm going to show you, are done. I can tell all of the edges of my onions are nice and browned and caramelized where they were touching the pan. Look at this big guy over here. Yeah, oh, nice. You see all that? Yeah. The important part to me is making sure the carrots are really, really well done. I'm going to find the thickest one. Take my nice sharp knife, or you can use a toothpick, and just make sure it's fork tender, goes all the way through. And then I'm happy with that. So that is all going to just kind of sit here and cool down. Prop things up. There we go. Got just enough time. I wanted to show you 3 super simple but really, really helpful veggie prep techniques here. Some of you have probably already seen some of these hacks, and that is awesome. The internet is sometimes a wonderful and sometimes an awful thing. So I'm going to use that little paring knife first to show snap peas. A lot of the time you can get them in bags pre-trimmed for you, and that's great. I get most of my produce at the farmer's market, so you have to do all of your own stuff. You wash it first and let it dry, hopefully air dry, unless it's greens, then you use a salad spinner. And then you trim stuff if you need to trim things. And I just kind of want to show, some people might not know because you buy them already trimmed. There are 2 strings on snap peas. A lot of people think that there's only 1, but there are 2. So the method, and this is sort of OCD, but it works every time. Find the shorter end of the 2 ends of the snap pea. It's like a banana. There's sort of like a butt end and then the end that you would grab to peel if it were a banana. That butt end, the shorter end, is the end that we want to start on, and you start by taking it down with your paring knife down the flat side. So each pea has a flat side and then a curved side. It's like the boat. This part goes in the water, and this part is what you sit down in. So we're going to take the short end, grab the end, and there's a string attached to it. You pull it all the way down the edge of the thing, and then you take it down to the other side and go back around the curved end. Some of them have very short strings, some of them have very long, thick strings. It usually depends on the size of the snap pea. The thinner and smaller the snap pea, the smaller and less annoying the string is going to be. Sometimes the bigger and thicker the snap pea, the longer and more annoying that string is going to be. And when you eat that, it gets stuck in your teeth. It's kind of fibrous and annoying. So it goes both sides of the snap pea, right? Really quickly, you can just go down one side and then around the curved edge. That one had really annoying strings. If that had been stuck in my teeth, I would have been so frustrated. That's why we do this. Take that big string down the flat side and then the round side. But just try to remember to start on the short end, not the long banana end. See, oh God, that is unpleasant. When people forget to take that out, that is not good. So I'm just prepping the snap peas in a very general way. I already cut a bunch in my handy dandy rewashable Ziploc bag. Try to think about sustainable packaging when you're getting into meal prep for your lives, because if you use Ziploc every week, it would just be a disaster. So, and that's not a brand thing, just, non-washable or reusable plastic. Get a bunch of that ready to go. My week is set for, I can snack on these, dip it into hummus or a really healthy dip. It's a good replacement for chips, in this little baggie to go. I love it in salads. I love it in roasted things. So it's halfway done for me, which is really helpful. The tomato trick. I know a lot of people have already seen this. If you want to get a pint of cherry tomatoes and cut them really quickly for your weekly meal prep, so you have cut tomatoes to put into your salads or other things, our 2 lids, we might have done this last week, our 2 lids on top, one holds the other down, all the tomatoes are sitting in the cavity. Excuse me. Using a serrated knife, you just slice through and you have nice cut tomatoes ready to go. That is just going to go into a small Tupperware. I've got some stuff over here ready.
It's great to have some fresh veggies like that chopped up. Super low in calories. I think 10 cherry tomatoes has about 30 calories. And with the snap peas, super great. I mean, the tomatoes are so fantastic right now anyway. Just lots of intense flavor there. And tomatoes, the 10 cherry tomatoes has about as much potassium as a medium banana, about 400 milligrams. So a great way to get some potassium, some vitamin C, beta carotene, lycopene. Tomatoes are well known for lycopene, which is really important for eye health. Someone was asking about brands of reusable Ziplocs, which you like, and are they freezer safe?
That is a really good question. This reusable bag, it doesn't say on the bag if it's freezer, and I have never tried to use this. This is a brand called Rusby, and I like that. It's Russbe. I like them because they're extremely washable. They're very thick. They're very, I don't feel like the plastic is getting like hot or softened by the hot water, and that just makes me feel like they're safer to clean and reuse. But there are so many different brands. There's also a lot of different companies that make beeswax wrapping instead of plastic. There's a lot of different companies that do I just happen to have some of those. I tend to use Tupperwares that have been around in my life for a long time. I keep the jelly jars and the spaghetti sauce jars, and I use those. Just anything that I'm not throwing away each time. Also, I mean, that's kind of how I tend to think of it. If it's already been bought and sold, like look at thrift shops, or once they open back up again, maybe we can do that. But there's lots of little jars and containers and things that might work, and then we're not overproducing items. That's sort of also an issue for me.
I like to use those glass ones with the snap-on lids, especially if it's something I'm going to reheat.
Yes.
Or take with me to work, right? Because they don't really leak. And then if you can pop it in the microwave and you're not microwaving in plastic.
Yep.
So those work out well too.
Yeah, and they're super dishwasher safe, and it's easy to clean, and they're stackable in the cupboard, right? Those are a really great option, really, really great option, because of the ease of being able to heat in them. I think that's fewer dishes to do, I love that stuff. So this is the last really fun trick that I wanted to show. Some people, I used to have an issue trying to cut corn off the cob just on my cutting board. It would just fly all over the place. And there's a couple different tricks. You could roll a towel around your cutting board, kind of make a little moat out of a towel, and then the corn's going to fly against the towel. This trick I like the best. So I use a large bowl, and then inside the large bowl, I put an upside down small bowl, something that just kind of nicely fits in there. And then my corn sits on top of the small bowl, and you chop down, and all the corn falls into the bowl. You don't want to cut your knife onto like a hard surface. Be careful as you get close to that small bowl. You don't want to slam your knife down onto it, especially if you're using metal like I am, because it'll dull your knife a little bit. But this idea of using like a vessel within a vessel is the, I think, most fun way to get all of your corn off the cob and neatly into one location. So fresh corn is amazing right now. It's amazing. So whether you get it at the supermarket or the farmer's market or from the guy on the corner, it doesn't matter. It's all coming from local farms, and it's all really, really, really sweet. And it's going to be lasting for quite a few months, I think. We're going to have a nice summer season, I hope. Fingers crossed. You can do a whole bunch of ears of corn. Cut it off of the cob, store it in a Tupperware. It's good for probably 2 to 3 days raw. And at that point, it's great mixed on top of a salad, put into other things. It's a really great addition because it adds a little bit of, well, a whole lot of natural sweetness to something that you're eating, but it's still pretty good for us in the long run, and I think, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Good.
So did you cook this corn first?
No.
Okay.
Raw, just cut off the cob raw, and you don't have to cook corn. It's perfectly edible and delicious, just crunchy and sweet. Throw it into a salad raw. I really highly recommend it. But having it cut off the cob to start your week out means like when you do need to cook it after a couple of days. It doesn't last all week as a raw vegetable. There's a lot of sugars that will start to break itself down. So you do want to, I like to, the first couple of days, use it raw in salads and then I make it corn like succotash. So I just saute it with some of the other veggies that I might have laying around, especially great with bell pepper. But I'm probably just going to toss it with the other veggies that I have and then make like a quick roast by Wednesday. And then it's just like a summer medley of vegetables, and the corn will be added into that.
So as the season of corn kind of comes to an end in a few months from now, like would you have to blanch it before if you wanted to save the fresh, blanch it and then freeze it?
Yeah. And you can do that with whole cobs or like cut the cobs in half or cut it off the cob. But what I would do is blanch it on the cob, then cut it off and freeze it if you're trying to freeze the kernels. But don't cut it and then blanch it. Yeah. But there's only a few vegetables that you really can freeze without blanching them. Mostly it's fruit. You can freeze almost any fruit without cooking it first. You can freeze, gosh, I'm hard pressed to think of what those vegetables are. There's not that many that you can do, but there are some. I know that there are some. I'm sorry, I'm just not. I think it's more of the hardier ones with a lot less water because it's the freezing of the water crystals which kind of ruins the structure of the vegetable itself. I know we're right on the mark here. I just want to pull this out and show you. I think that the chicken's going to have to cook for another couple of minutes, but I want to show you what's going on with it and what it looks like. It might be actually cooked through, but what I'm going for now is some caramelization on the skin. So I'm going to turn the oven up and put this close to the top of the oven, and it's going to get more heat on the top, and we're going to have a really nice roast. One quick thing that I can already tell that the chicken is cooking well, if not already done, probably mostly done, is that the meat is pulling back away from the bone. So that sometimes happens when like the legs get a piece of bone that is broken or pulled away from it, like this is here, and the meat is shrinking up on the bone. It's also shrinking and pulling away from the end leg joint. Like this used to be all the way down covering this joint. Now it's shrunk up all the way. So that's telling me that it's cooking. It's probably mostly done. I'm going to cut into the fat part of one of these legs. There are no juices coming out. Very well cooked through. I can't see any pink meat. The thighs are going to be more important though. So if you have a thermometer, make sure you're not putting it in next to the bone because then it's taking the temperature of the bone. The bone's going to be much hotter. So find the meatiest part of the outside flesh. Put your thermometer in there if you have one. If not, you just sort of cut into it like I am. Very hot chicken. There's There's no blood coming out. There's no pink. All of the muscle fibers are stringy, and I could pull them apart and shred them. If they were still raw, they would be that kind of like gelatinous, like squishy muscle instead of stringy, fibrous muscle. All of my herbs are really nicely roasted. My garlic is fully roasted inside of the paper. That's going to be exciting when I squeeze all of that out. But like I said, I want to get a little bit of color on the skin. That's sort of the point of roasting skin on chicken. You're going to use the skin, make it the best you can, render out as much of the fat as possible, and get it really nice and caramelized. So I'm going to put it at the top of my oven, and I'm going to turn my oven up, and you will be able to see that finished color in the Instagram photo, which I will absolutely load up as soon as this is all done. But I wanted to go through that quick list. So we've got roasted chicken with garlic and herbs, risotto, roasted carrots and onions, roasted Brussels sprouts. You can use bagged lettuce or chop and wash your own. Snap peas, corn, and cherry tomatoes to add into salads, mixed bowls, then roast them up later in the week with the rest of your vegetables. And then the recipe I sent for the dressing this week is a champagne vinaigrette. Works just as well with a white wine vinegar or even a red wine vinegar. You could make it a totally different color, but equally delicious. So that's just a quick, make it in a jar salad dressing, really delicious to use as a sauce. Maybe on a bowl, like a chicken and salad bowl. You can use it as a sauce if you're making a wrap. Drizzle it all up together with a bunch of the greens inside the wrap. Really great way to kind of finish off a lot of the different flavors that we have this week. Traditional kind of French cafe dressing. So
we did have one more question about corn, and if you leave it on the cob, can you keep it longer than 2 to 3 days in the refrigerator?
If you, if you just buy raw corn and shuck it, or don't even shuck it, it'll last longer if you leave it in the shuck. Like if you leave it, and if you just use it when you want to use it and cut it off really quickly, and you have nice fresh raw corn, if that's that would absolutely last longer. If you shuck it all, or if you have pre-shucked corn, it will last a little bit longer if it's still on the cob, but it's going to start drying out and kind of shriveling up a little bit. That's why you want to leave it in the husk. But that's why once I've got it all shucked, then I like to just cut it all up because, I like to put chopped raw corn in almost everything. All my salads, I'll mix it with black beans, I'll put it with bell pepper, I just kind of eat it by the spoonful. It's like nature's candy.